Welcome to my channel. My name is Meiko. In today's video, I will talk about things from volume 6 of the manga FULLMETAL Alchemist. But before I do, there is something I completely forgot to talk about in the previous video, so I will talk about it a bit. Izumi was introduced in volume 5, and I wanted to talk about Izumi's name. I believe that most of the characters in FULLMETAL Alchemist have English names. Among them, Izumi and Hayate of Hawkeye's dog Black Hayate are the two that I think are exceptionally Japanese names. Izumi means spring in Japanese. It refers to a place where groundwater gushes out. The word "izumi" is also sometimes used to mean source, probably because it was literally a water source. For example, a common expression is 知識の泉. The word 知識 means knowledge, so a literal translation would be the spring of knowledge. But in English, it seems more common to say the source of knowledge. Since Izumi is an owl's master, I think the name Izumi, which also means source, fits very well. Izumi is a common Japanese name for a person and is used for both women and men. Personally, I would think of a woman first when I hear the name Izumi, but I wouldn't be surprised if the person is a man. Also, there is a family name Izumi, so the name Izumi could be possible. Well, it should be hard to find the person with that name in reality. And I am not very sure about it, but I feel that the accent is slightly different between Izumi for the family name and Izumi for the first name. For a family name, it is Izumi, and for a first name, it is Izumi. The accent for Izumi meaning spring is the same as Izumi for a first name. That's all about Izumi's name. Now I will move on to the main topic about volume 6. Let me start with the titles for each chapter. 第22話、仮面の男。仮面 is mask in English and 男 is man, so it can be translated directly as the masked man. Next, 第23話、叩け天国の扉。叩け is an imperative form of knock, and since 天国 is heaven and 扉 is door, I think it is okay to translate it as knock the door of heaven. Next, 第24話、鋼の錬金術師。This is the title of the manga as it is, so of course it is FULLMETAL Alchemist. I explained it in more detail in the very first video of the series, so if you are interested, you can watch it from the link in the description below. It's always good to see this kind of title drop chapter. Next, 第25話、師弟のけじめ。The Japanese word 師弟 means master and apprentice in just one word. It is easy to understand when you look at the kanji. 師匠 master is written like this in kanji, and 弟子 apprentice is written like this in kanji. Take the first kanji of 師匠 and the first kanji of 弟子 and put them together, then it can form the word 師弟. I know it is a bit confusing that the first kanji for 弟子 is read as で in the word 弟子, but as て in the word 師弟. This happens a lot in Japanese, so the aspect of the readings of kanji, you have to learn it word by word. And the word けじめ is a bit difficult to translate, but it is used to mean drawing a line or taking responsibility. That's all about chapter titles. Now let me explain what I found interesting in the manga itself. I would like to start with chapter 22, but actually there was nothing in chapter 22 that I wanted to pick up to explain from my perspective as a Japanese. But this is a good opportunity, so I want to talk a little bit about an important concept for the whole story that appears in this chapter. The concept is 一は善、善は一. The word 一 means one in English and zen means all in English. So the phrase can be translated as one is all is one. This phrase appeared as an assignment from Izumi to add an owl at the end of the previous volume, volume 5, but I wanted to bring it up here because Ed and I'll get to what it means here in this chapter 22. Ed says this about one is all is one, which if I try to translate it directly is the great invisible flow. I don't know if you call it the world or the universe. Me and Al are just one small part of that great flow, one out of the all. But the all exists when the one is gathered together. I don't think this concept or the phrase 一は善、善は一 is a common Japanese thing. At least I never heard of it outside of FULLMETAL Alchemist. I tried to find out more about its original source or something like what inspired it, but I couldn't find anything where Arakawa sensei clearly stated about it. If anyone knows of any interviews or other articles where Arakawa sensei mentions something about it, please let me know. And while I was researching, I came across a few fan sites that discuss the original source of one is all is one on their own. But I will not focus on that. What I want to talk about is a certain Japanese poem. When I read this chapter, I remembered the food chain. Perhaps many readers did as well. But there is another thing that reminded me, which is kind of surprising, and it was a Japanese poem. It is by one of Japan's famous poets, Kaneko Misuzu, and its title is Hatsuto Kami-sama, which can be translated literally as The Bee and the Gods. The poem starts with the bee is in the flower, which gradually expands to the flower is in the garden is in the blah blah blah, and eventually becomes the word is in God, and finally ends with and so, God is in the little bee. I don't know how to put it, but for some reason this chapter reminded me of this poem. Perhaps I felt a similarity in that the little one in some way contains the great being. It is a rather famous poem by a famous Japanese poet, so it is possible that Arakawa sensei knows it. I'm not saying that it is the original source or anything like that though. I just talked about the poem I remembered from this chapter because I am curious to know what you remembered when you read this chapter. If you have any, please let me know in the comments. That's all for chapter 22. Let me start my explanations of chapter 23 here. Actually, I also don't have that much to talk about in chapter 23, but I want to talk a little bit about truth. I say truth because when I looked up the translation of the word, I found truth, but I am a little hesitant to translate it as truth. Because in Dr. Marco's meaningful words to Ed, truth was an important keyword, right? In Japanese, 真実 was the word for it. On the other hand, the word 真理 is used in this chapter for the being in front of the door. The words 真実 and 真理 are similar, but they are slightly different. The two kanji for 真実 both mean true, and in another way it could be translated as fact. On the other hand, kanji 理 in 真理 can mean principle, and if 真理 is translated to include this meaning, it could be translated as true principle. Perhaps the English word truth includes this meaning. Personally, however, I am a little disappointed that 真実 and 真理 are translated by the same word true. I feel that 真理 is a heavier and stronger word than 真実 because 真理 is a principle that never changes, no matter when or where. So I would like to add a few words and translate it as eternal and unchanging truth. But I'm not a native English speaker at all, so maybe I just don't fully understand the meaning of the word truth. And I have one more thing to add about truth. It is about the first person of truth that Ed met face to face. It is the same ore as Ed. There are several ways to write ore, and the way it is written is also the same as Ed's ore. This is an interesting choice and, of course, intentional, but I thought it might be difficult to express in languages other than Japanese. I only know about English, but the first person in English is basically just I. Maybe this is a bit of a spoiler, but when a certain other character meets truth in front of the door of the truth, the first person used by truth is not ore, but it is the same as the character's first person. I think this is a fascinating aspect that can only be expressed in a language like Japanese, which has multiple first persons. In addition to the first person, truth, whom it met, is quite as like in terms of the tone of its speech. It would be nice if such nuances could also be translated. Those were the explanations for chapter 23. I will then move on to explaining chapter 24. First, there is a scene in the middle of the chapter when Mustang comes to recruit Ed to be a state alchemist and is on his way back. When Hawkeye says about Ed, he had eyes like he couldn't stand up again. Mustang replies, "You think so? Those are eyes with fire in them." In English, it might be more natural to say something like he had fire in his eyes, but the literal translation from Japanese is eyes with fire in them. And in the phrase, this kanji is used for the word that means fire. In the phrase, it is read as "hi" like "hi no tsuita me," but it is usually read as "hono." "Hi" is usually written with this kanji and means fire. On the other hand, "hono" means flame, so I translated it as fire earlier, but it doesn't matter if it is translated as flame, I think. The kanji in the phrase can also be read as hono, but we usually use this kanji for hono because, as you can see, the middle kanji has many strokes and is complicated. I didn't know the difference between the middle kanji hono and the right kanji hono. In Japanese, intense feelings resulting from envy or anger are sometimes expressed with hono praying. And I found a statement that the middle kanji hono is more often used for this purpose. But I personally feel that the right kanji hono is also used in this way nowadays. The right hono is the more commonly used kanji in everyday life. It has fewer strokes and is easier to write. But somehow the middle kanji hono feels cooler, which is probably why it is used quite often in manga. By the way, the kanji for hono used in Kono Mustang's second name, Flame Alchemist, is the more difficult one in the middle. I will move on to the next. After Ed takes the state alchemist exam, there is a scene where Ed and Mustang have a brief conversation. Between that scene and the scene where Mustang gives Ed the silver watch, which is the state alchemist certificate, and various documents, there is a panel with only dialogue on a black background. The content of the conversation indicates that at least two people are talking. First, there is a person, let's go it's X, who is concerned that Ed may be too young, to which a person, let's go it's Y, replies that there is no problem. When X asks if Y has chosen a second name for Ed, Y replies, it's a bit heavy for a 12-year-old boy, but he'll get used to it. Shortly after, in a conversation between Ed and Mustang, Mustang implies that the viewer gave Ed that second name. Therefore, we can assume that Y is viewer Bradley. In Japanese, it's not just the content of the conversation, but Y's tone of speech is also Bradley-like. It would take too long to explain exactly what kind of tone that is, so I won't do that here. On the other hand, there aren't many clues about person X. However, there are two things I can tell from the Japanese version. The first is the way X speaks. X uses honorifics. Honorifics are basically used by subordinates to superiors in Japanese. Then does that mean X is in a lower position than Y? We can't necessarily say so. In manga and anime, there are characters called keigo kyara in Japanese who speak politely to everyone. I won't say such people don't exist in real life, but most people use either honorific or casual speech depending on who they are talking to. So it is a kind of anime manga thing. I think such keigo kyara, honorific characters, often appear in manga and anime for characterization purposes. Whether X is lower in rank than Y or is simply an honorific character is connected to the second thing I can tell from the Japanese dialogue. It's the fact that X calls Y, probably bluntly, Kimi. Kimi is a kind of Japanese second person. It is like you in English, but we have many different words for it. Kimi is used to address someone of an equal or a lower position. It is more polite than omae or anta, which are also the second person. Still, it should not be used to address someone who is superior to you. From this, I assume that X was using polite language just because he is an honorific character and is at least equal to, perhaps even slightly superior to, Y, the viewer. I think most Japanese readers could have guessed as much as I did on their first reading. I mean that Bradley is not the solo absolute leader of the group that seems to be up to something. I'm curious to know how readers of other languages interpreted that part. I think people could have known that he has someone who shares his schemes, but I'm not sure how the power balance between the two is portrayed in other languages. Well, anyway, here's a spoiler you'll find out about later in the manga. X is most likely Pride because he speaks politely and calls Bradley Kimi. In Japanese, it is possible to guess whose dialogue is whose based on tone and the use of the first and the second person, even if the character does not appear directly but only through dialogue. Compared to that, I thought that in languages other than Japanese, you might have to judge based on context alone, which can be difficult. I would appreciate it if you could tell me how you interpreted the conversation between X and Y the first time you read it, as well as when you read it for the second time. That's all I have to say about chapter 24. Here comes the last chapter of volume 6, chapter 25. The first scene is of Colonel Mustang conversing with General Grumman over a chess game. Mustang makes a move that puts Grumman in check. The word check here is written in this kanji and is read as check. This kanji is usually read as ote. In Japan, we have a game called shogi, which is similar to chess. Ote is the word used in shogi that is similar to check in chess. The reason for using ote for the kanji and check for the reading may be that ote is more familiar to Japanese readers and easier to understand. There is also a scene right after this where Brother, one of Mustang's men, is playing shogi. And in the same way, the kanji ote is used to read check there as well. Personally, I think the word check is used for the reading in this scene either because for Brother and the others, shogi is a falling game. So making them use the familiar term check instead of ote makes more sense. The notation when Breda and Paulman say shogi is also interesting. It is written in katakana as shogi. Usually, shogi is written in kanji like this, and even if it were written in hiragana or katakana, it would be shogi using u, not a bar line like the one above. Perhaps the unusual writing style is to express that a mistress has no kanji and that Brother and Palmer only know shogi by sound. The next scene is of Ed and Al in Dublin. A stranger approaches them and asks, "Will you give something to a poor man like me?" This man, whose name is revealed to be Bido on a later page, uses the first person ashi in this dialogue. It is said that ashi is a broken form of the first person atashi, which is a broken form of watashi. So ashi can be considered quite casual for the first person, and it was actually used by common people. It is not used by people of noble status. It is a slightly old-fashioned word that is not used very often today. The thing is, Beadle refers to himself as Ore in the later scene. Probably his usual first person is Ore, and the reason he used ashi when talking to Ed and Al is to pretend to beg. Using the first person ashi doesn't immediately imply begging, but it's true that it conveys a feeling of not being so rich. The first person ashi also has the image of a person who lives freely without worrying about the world. It is difficult to explain all the images associated with each first person because they have various aspects. So I'll leave this topic here and move on to the next topic. This one is also from the same scene. When Beetle asks for charity, Ed responds, "Shut up and work." But Beetle continues, "Oh, come on. If you are a state alchemist, you must have a lot of money, don't you?" At this moment, Beetle talks while making a hand sign like this. This is the Japanese hand sign for money. It probably comes from the round shape of a coin. By the way, making a circle with thumb and forefinger is used as an OK sign when held in this position. To express money, the palm should face up. It is often used in fiction such as dramas and manga to request a bribe or demand money unfairly through threats, so it is not a very elegant gesture. I don't think it's used much in modern daily life. I've heard that people in the US use this hand sign to mean money. I wonder if it's still used in everyday life. I was just curious. I had never really thought about the fact that hand sign differs from country to country. As a Japanese person, I am so accustomed to certain hand signs that I may not have paid any attention to them. If there is a hand sign in manga that you don't understand, please ask about it in the comments. That's all for chapter 25. Those were the explanations of Volume 6, chapters 22 to 25 of the manga FULLMETAL Alchemist. Please feel free to comment and feedback and questions. In this video, I talked quite a bit about the first and second person. I believe these are types of expressions unique to the Japanese language, so I wanted to introduce them. The concept may be difficult to understand, but I think it is very interesting. Hopefully, I will have a chance to make a video all about them in the future. Thank you for watching so far. I hope to see you in the next video. Bye!